We also don't seek any costs against the applicant.
Right. We continue now. There are concerns that the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority is delaying the authorization of the Sputnik V vaccine. The Russian-produced COVID-19 vaccine was the first vaccine to be registered for use in any country and is used in more than 70 countries. However, South Africa is yet to approve the use of the vaccines. Here to talk to us about this, we are joined now by the CEO of SAHPRA, Dr. Boitumelo Semete-Mokokotlela. Dr. Boitumelo, good evening and thank you very much for your time. The last count I looked was 70 countries having approved the use of this Sputnik vaccine, and South Africa still working out through the finalities of this. But however, there are backers of this vaccine who are now saying this could possibly jeopardize their business and their entry into the country to set up a manufacturing site. How do you respond to that?
No, thank you, and thanks for inviting us to address this matter. So, this vaccine is indeed under evaluation by SAHPRA. We've got 2 types of applications for this vaccine: emergency use approval, as well as what we call a rolling review. So for the rolling review, there's data that continuously is being submitted. For the emergency use application, in this case, there had been numerous back and forth with the applicant, primarily on 2 aspects that speak to, so remember, we focus on safety, quality, and efficacy. So a lot of the quality aspects in terms of understanding that the facility where this vaccine is being manufactured at is GMP compliant, etc. So, we spent some time with the applicant on that. And then the other aspect that we're still evaluating is around the efficacy. And when it comes to efficacy, every country does look at the local epidemiology. So they would take into account that aspect, but also in the case of COVID, look at the vaccine efficacy against the dominant variants of concern at the time. So we are still evaluating the scientific data that's been provided to us.
Yeah. Is this a different criteria to what all the other countries, for example, Paraguay, Venezuela, Uzbekistan, you name them, Mongolia, even Algeria, I think the first African country to have approved this as far as this GMP compliance is concerned?
So, all regulators largely look at safety, quality, and efficacy, but the regulatory requirements, there are instances wherein they vary for a specific jurisdiction, particularly when it comes to matters of the local epidemiology and the disease context in that country. And so in this case, for us as SAHPRA, typically, and even outside of COVID, we would align ourselves with the WHO, we would align ourselves with other regulators wherein we've got MOUs with them, such as the European Medicines Agency, the Japanese authority, the Australian authority. So we've got a number that we align ourselves with. And so in this case, I don't have a lot of detail in terms of what local requirements the various countries that have authorized put in place.
Right. Of course, according to the health minister, we don't have a shortage of vaccines until December in the country. But what we do have is vaccine hesitancy, where people are saying, well, why are we being fed one particular vaccine and while others are not being made available? Do you think making it available will go a long way in dealing with that vaccine hesitancy? And does SAHPRA even think about that?
We do. One of our mandates is indeed around access. And so while we're not actively involved in the procurement as well as the rollout, from a safety perspective, and hence we've been engaged in the public a lot around vaccine safety. So far, SAHPRA has in essence we had authorized the AstraZeneca, which was emergency use authorization, the Pfizer, J&J, as well as Sinovac. And we're currently evaluating the 2, which is Sinovac and Sputnik. So once we are satisfied as SAHPRA from a safety, quality, and efficacy, we will then authorize that. Whether the country decides to procure those or not, we unfortunately do not get involved in those discussions.
Yeah. I don't think people are doubting that eventually you will, but I suppose people are asking how long that process will take. It's already, I think, over a year now since this particular vaccine had been approved in Russia. Of course, that's where it originates from. And then with all the other 70 countries that have then approved it. South Africa, 12 months later, still have not. And you're saying we will, but people will say, well, so when exactly or how long will that process take?
Yeah, and you know, we've expedited our processes. I mean, we've put together our teams and they're working long hours. But what determines how long we take is also the quality of the submission. And so if there are gaps in the submission, we would then write to the applicant and indicate what additional data we require. At times, it takes the applicant anything between a week and a month to provide us with that data. Then we must still then put together our panel, who we submit the documents to, our expert panel, submit the documents to, and we convene in a meeting and we discuss this. So it's really dependent on the quality of the submission, but also on the clinical data. And so with every application, the timeframes will vary, but it still is expedited compared to what we typically would take as SAHPRA.
Yeah. So without having done the trial here in South Africa itself, how then would you know the trueness of the claims around efficacy? How would you know the results without having conducted the trial?
Yeah, so I mean, across the world, as regulators, there are harmonized global standards that we comply with, because for a number of products, again, this is not unique to COVID, the trials may not necessarily be conducted in the country, but because there is international harmonized guidance and processes, as well as study protocols, we're able to accept data of a clinical trial conducted in another country, and we would then look at that. So there's very clear harmonized processes that enable us to do so.
Right. And so if you are able to do that, are you not able to do that with all the other requirements? To say, well, let's look at what the other countries have said about this particular issue, GMP compliance. Let's look at what they've said about efficacy and then therefore bring that into your own assessment.
So what we do is we do that, so the applicant needs to provide us with that.
Okay.
So we cannot go out and solicit data that the applicant does not provide. So if the applicant has conducted studies, say in Chile, we would accept the clinical data from that country, and we would then review. In terms of relying on the work done by other regulators, you must have a memorandum of understanding in place with that regulator. And so the countries that I'd indicated earlier are the countries wherein we've got memorandum of understanding, and also then we also rely on the work done by the WHO. And so, as I say, again, this is not unique to COVID. This is an approach that we would take typically as SAHPRA.
Dr. Boitumelo, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us. SAHPRA CEO there, Dr. Boitumelo Semete Mokokotlela. We'll continue in a moment. Sia Beniza talks to us on the current economic state